I never thought a single gate could spark the kind of chaos that would leave an entire neighborhood in ruins. But then again, I never dealt with someone like Karen before. One morning, I came back from town to find my ranch gate, the heavy steel barrier that kept my bison herd safe, ripped out of the ground like it swaths nothing. And there she was, arms crossed. A smug little grin stretched across her face, declaring she'd fixed the eyesore. What she didn't realize is that a gate isn't just decoration out here. It's the only line between hundreds of pounds of raw muscle, horns, and wild instinct and her perfectly trimmed lawn. The silence didn't last long. Soon, the ground began to shake, a low rumble rolling like thunder. My herd was on the move, and when they saw an opening, they took it. Karen thought she'd won a battle. She had no idea she'd just started a war. Folks around here know me as Jack Carter. I'm 56 years old, born and raised in the wide-open plains of Montana, where the sky stretches so far you can almost believe it swallows the world whole. I've been a rancher my entire life, and while plenty of people talk about livestock and cattle, my pride and joy has always been my bison herd. They're not just animals to me. They're a living, breathing link to the land and the history carved into it long before homeowners associations and picket fences ever showed up. Every morning, I rise before the sun. I brew my coffee strong enough to keep a man upright through the harshest winter, and I sit on my porch while the sky goes from ink black to streaks of pink and gold. I watch my herd graze across the pastures, their shaggy coats steaming in the cold air, their massive silhouettes framed by the horizon. That's the kind of peace I work for, the kind of peace I thought I'd earned after decades of hard labor. My ranch isn't fancy. The house is built sturdy, pine wood and stone, with a wraparound porch where my dog, Buck, likes to sprawl out like he owns the place. The land runs wide, bordered by an old creek to the east and a row of cottonwoods to the west. My father passed it down to me, and I always swore I'd take care of it just like he did. It's not about luxury. It's about roots, legacy, and freedom. Now, just beyond that cottonwood line, there's a newer development rows of suburban houses, all painted in varying shades of beige and taupe, with lawns trimmed to the inch and mailboxes standing in perfect symmetry. That's where the Homeowners Association rules with an iron fist. And at the head of that HOA is Karen. Karen, I'll never forget the first time I met her. Mid-40s. With a sharp bob haircut and sunglasses that looked like they belonged on a reality TV star. She spoke in clipped, rehearsed sentences. The kind of woman who thought a frown and a clipboard gave her authority over the world. She wasn't the type to ask questions. She was the type to issue orders. Your fence looks weathered. Your barn is too visible from the street. It didn't take long to realize she wasn't making suggestions. She was trying to impose her will. But here's the thing, my ranch doesn't belong to their HOA. It's been zoned agricultural for generations. My family was here long before her Cedar Ridge community was ever platted on a map. Their rules don't apply to me, or at least, they're not supposed to. For a while, I tried to brush it off. I figured if I kept to myself, tended my land, and minded my business, Karen would eventually get bored and turn her sights back on the color of her neighbors' shutters or the length of their grass. But I underestimated her. Karen had the kind of stubbornness that could grind stone into dust if you gave her enough time. And she didn't just want compliance, she wanted control. It started with comments. I'd be hauling hay and she'd stop at the edge of the road, arms folded, lips pursed, asking why my ranch gate was so industrial looking. I'd be out checking the fence line, and she'd remind me that livestock in close proximity to residential areas pose risks. She wasn't subtle. Her words carried that sweet, poisonous tone of someone who wasn't just concerned, but convinced she was entitled to fix what wasn't broken. My gate, though, was no ordinary gate. Heavy steel, set deep in concrete posts, wide enough to let equipment through, but secure enough to hold back my herd. That gate was a line between order and chaos. Between my ranch and her neighborhood. I knew it. And deep down, I think she knew it too. But she couldn't see past her obsession with appearances. See, Karen thrived on order. The kind of order where every trash bin is pulled in by 6:01 p.m. sharp. Where holiday decorations are approved by committee. Where even the height of a rosebush gets debated. She couldn't stand my ranch because it was unpredictable, wild, and, most of all, out of her control. I'll admit, there's a certain humor in it. You've got me, a man in work boots and a weathered Stetson, with hands calloused from years of rope and reins. Then you've got her, teetering on heels, unsuited for gravel, convinced her laminated bylaws could override county law. It was a clash of worlds waiting to happen. Life before the feud was good, though my days followed a rhythm sun up. Check the herd, mend a fence here, haul water there, share a laugh with old neighbors at the diner in town. In the evenings, I'd grill a steak, sip a glass of bourbon, and watch the stars spill across the sky. The kind of life most people dream about when they say they want peace and quiet. That peace, however, was fragile, because as much as I tried to ignore her, Karen was like a storm cloud building on the horizon. You see it gathering in the distance, darkening little by little, until one day it breaks loose and you're caught in a downpour you can't escape. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact shift the moment she realized I wasn't going to bend to her HOA rules. That was when her polite suggestions turned into ultimatums. That was when my ranch stopped being just land in her eyes and became her battlefield. And me, I wasn't looking for a fight. But I'll tell you this, if someone comes after my home, my livelihood, or my herd, they'd better be ready for the consequences. Because out here, gates aren't for show, and neither are boundaries. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. It started with a letter, a plain white envelope stuck in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just slipped in like a secret. Inside was a typed notice, signed with the bold flourish of Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, President, Karen Whitfield. The letter claimed my ranch gate was in violation of community standards. It said the gate disrupted the aesthetic continuity of Cedar Ridge and that my livestock barrier posed an unneighborly impression. It ordered me to remove it within 30 days or face fines. Now, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper, my calloused fingers pressing against the words. My ranch isn't part of Cedar Ridge, never has been. My property line is older than their subdivision, older than Karen herself. But she had signed that letter like she had jurisdiction over me, like her word was law. At first, I laughed, a deep, rolling laugh that echoed through the empty kitchen. Buck, my old dog, perked his ears as if to ask what was so funny. "These people have lost their minds," I muttered, crumpling the paper into a ball and tossing it into the wood stove. But laughter only carried me so far, because Karen wasn't the kind of person who stopped at a single notice. The very next weekend, she marched down the road in her pressed khakis and oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. She stood at the edge of my gravel drive, staring at my gate like it had personally insulted her. "Mr. Carter," she called out, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "This structure is not in compliance." I leaned on the fence post, chewing on a piece of straw, and gave her the slow kind of grin that tends to irritate people like her. "Karen, this is a ranch gate. It complies with the laws of Montana and the laws of common sense, and it's staying right where it is." Her lips tightened until they were nothing more than a thin red line. "This neighborhood has rules, standards. This ain't your neighborhood," I reminded her. "This is Carter land." For a moment, she just stared at me, the kind of stare that promised she wasn't used to hearing no. Then she scribbled something on her clipboard and spun on her heel, storming off like she'd just filed a declaration of war. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she'd huff and puff, complain to her HOA board, maybe gossip a little at their book clubs. But I underestimated her appetite for control. A week later, I came back from town to find bright yellow flyers taped to my fence posts. "Unsafe ranching practices endanger our community," they read, in bold, capital letters. Below were bullet points. Large, aggressive animals housed too close to family homes. Unsightly industrial gate creates hostile environment. Potential property devaluation for all residents. I tore one down, crumpled it in my fist, and felt the heat rise in my chest. This wasn't just about my gate anymore. She was painting me as a menace. A danger to her tidy little kingdom of beige houses and trimmed hedges. That night, at the diner, I noticed the sideways glances. A few of the newer Cedar Ridge folks shifted uncomfortably when I walked in, whispering behind their menus. Longtime neighbors, the ones who'd known me for years, shook their heads at the nonsense, but even they admitted Karen's stirring people up. She won't let this go. And they were right. 2 days later, I caught her on my property line again, this time with 2 other board members in tow. They stood there like a firing squad, pointing at my gate, scribbling notes. I could hear her saying words like liability and legal action. I walked up slowly, boots crunching against the gravel. "You all need to leave," I said, calm but firm. "You've got no business here." Karen didn't flinch. "If you don't remove that gate, we will pursue further measures." That's when I stepped closer, close enough for her to see the sun-weathered lines on my face, the grit in my eyes. "Karen, let me spell it out for you. This land, it's mine. These animals mine. This gate mine. You have no authority here. None." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by that smug smile. "We'll see," she said, turning back toward the subdivision. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping bourbon and staring at the gate under the moonlight. It stood there strong and steady, a silent guardian against the chaos that Karen seemed hell-bent on unleashing. I knew then this wasn't going to end with letters or flyers. Karen was a woman who thrived on escalation, and she wasn't going to stop until she either got her way or got flattened by the reality she refused to see. The first spark had been struck, and I could feel the heat building. Because here's the truth: when you live next to a herd of bison, you respect boundaries, you don't test fences, and you sure as hell don't rip out gates. But Karen, she had no idea what kind of fire she was playing with. If the first spark was that letter in my mailbox, the weeks that followed were the wildfire. Karen wasn't content with a simple complaint. She was determined to turn my ranch into the centerpiece of her HOA crusade, and every day she found a new way to fan the flames. It began with more letters. Not one, not 2, but stacks of them. Some were typed, others handwritten, each carrying the Cedar Ridge letterhead as though it was the U.S. Constitution itself. They were delivered to my mailbox, taped to my gate, even tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck when I stopped at the diner in town. Each letter repeated the same accusations: unsafe livestock, unsightly barrier, non-compliance with community standards. And each letter carried threats of fines, legal action, and escalating measures. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I've lived long enough to know the difference between authority and a bluff. Cedar Ridge had no power over my ranch, but Karen was betting that if she piled on enough paper and intimidation, I'd eventually cave. But I didn't cave. Instead, I started collecting every letter in a neat stack on my desk. Each one was evidence not of my wrongdoing, but of hers. Still, the letters weren't the worst of it. The real trouble came when Karen weaponized the gossip mill. At the next HOA meeting, which I wasn't even a part of. Mind you, she stood up and declared my bison were a danger to the community. She claimed she'd seen them stampeding near school children. A complete fabrication. She told neighbors that my industrial ranch gate was a constant reminder of blight dragging down their property values. And the kicker, she warned them that if I wasn't stopped, it was only a matter of time before tragedy struck. By the next morning, whispers had spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. Folks in Cedar Ridge eyed me like I was harboring a pack of wild grizzlies instead of a herd of bison. Some even crossed the street when I drove by in town, as though the mud on my boots might stain their manicured lawns. I'll admit, it stung. I've lived in this county my whole life. I've shared tools, fixed fences, and lent trucks to people who needed help. Now, thanks to Karen's mouth, I was the villain of their bedtime stories. But Karen wasn't finished. No. She was just warming up. One morning, I woke to the sound of engines. A convoy of SUVs lined up along the road outside my property, their hazard lights blinking. Out stepped Karen, clipboard in hand, flanked by half a dozen board members like she was leading a parade. They pointed at my gate, at my fence line, at the bison grazing peacefully in the distance, scribbling notes like they were inspectors on a mission. I walked up, hands on my hips. "Morning," I said. Calm but firm. Karen's lips curled into that smug smile I'd grown to despise. "Mr. Carter, we are here to conduct an inspection." "Inspection of what?" I asked. "Of your property," she replied matter-of-factly. "You've been cited for multiple violations." I let out a low chuckle. "Lady, this isn't your jurisdiction. You've got no authority here." "None." Her eyes narrowed. "If you continue to resist, we'll escalate this to the county." "Go right ahead," I said, tipping my hat. The county knows exactly where my property lines are. The board members shifted uneasily. Some of them looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But Karen held her ground, scribbling notes furiously as though her pen strokes could bend reality to her will. It wasn't just theatrics, though. Soon after, I started noticing more cars slowing down near my ranch. People I didn't recognize leaning out their windows, snapping photos of my gate and my herd. Rumors reached me that Karen had circulated petitions to limit ranching activity near Cedar Ridge. She even tried to recruit some of my longtime neighbors, dangling promises of improved property values if they supported her crusade. Most of them told her to buzz off, but a few cracked under the pressure. I overheard one of them at the diner whispering, "What if she's right? What if the bison get loose?" That was Karen's strategy: wear people down, drip by drip, until they started doubting what they knew. I won't lie, the weight of it started pressing on me. Nights grew quieter. I found myself sitting longer on the porch, staring at the gate in the moonlight, wondering how far she was willing to go. And then came the threat. I caught her one evening at the property line again, standing there with 2 HOA board members. She leaned against the fence, her voice calm but cutting. "If you don't handle this, Mr. Carter, we will. Mark my words." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine, not because I thought she had power, but because I realized she was reckless enough to act without it. She was playing a dangerous game, and she didn't even realize how close she was to lighting the fuse that would blow up in her face. As I walked back to the house that night, the wind whistling through the cottonwoods, I had a feeling deep in my gut the worst was yet to come. When people like Karen puff up their feathers and throw their weight around, they usually have one thing in common, a weakness they don't want anyone to see. And I'll tell you, the moment I realized she had one, the whole game shifted. It started the day I drove down to the county courthouse. I wasn't there to pick a fight. I just wanted clarity. If Karen was so sure she had authority over my ranch, I needed to know exactly where the law stood. So I spent the better part of an afternoon hunched over dusty plat maps and zoning records, the kind that hadn't seen daylight since Reagan was president. And there it was, in black and white Carter Ranch, established in 1912, zoned agricultural, exempt from residential HOA jurisdiction. The Cedar Ridge development didn't even exist until the early 2000s. My land was as independent as the day it was fenced. Karen had no legal footing, not even a pebble to stand on. But I didn't stop there. Curiosity drove me deeper. I filed a request to see HOA financial records, which as a nonprofit corporation were public documents. What I found nearly made me laugh out loud. Line after line of expenditures jumped out at me: landscaping consultations, legal fees without corresponding case numbers, even an entry marked Community Improvement Fund with thousands of dollars missing context. And wouldn't you know it, some of those checks were signed by none other than President Karen Whitfield herself. It didn't take a lawyer to figure out what was happening. Karen was playing HOA queen with other people's money, dipping into funds whenever it suited her crusades. If the rest of Cedar Ridge knew she was bleeding their coffers to bankroll her war against me, her iron grip on that community would crumble faster than a dry corral post. Still, evidence without context is just paper, so I started keeping my own file. Every flyer she posted, every letter she shoved in my mailbox, every time she trespassed onto my property line, I documented it all. Photos, copies, even recordings of conversations when I could manage it. I didn't plan to use it just yet, but I knew the day would come. While I gathered proof, I also started talking to people. Not the HOA board, they were too far gone in Karen's pocket, but regular neighbors. Folks who lived in Cedar Ridge but hadn't completely bought into her hysteria. One of them, a young couple named the Harrisons, pulled me aside at the diner. "Jack, we know Karen's been saying things," the wife whispered, glancing around like she was afraid Karen would materialize from the sugar shaker. But we don't believe it. We've seen your bison, they're calm. They keep to themselves. Honestly, we like having them nearby. The husband nodded. What Karen doesn't tell people is how she's been using HOA money. My cousin's on the board. They're fed up, but too scared to challenge her. That was the moment I realized Karen's power wasn't as solid as she thought. It was smoke and mirrors, intimidation and bluster. All I had to do was pull the right thread, and the whole thing would unravel. But pride has a way of making men impatient. I wanted to walk up to her doorstep right then and there, shove the zoning maps in her face, and watch her choke on the truth. Yet something inside me said to wait. Timing matters in a fight. You don't show your cards until your opponent's overextended, off balance, certain they've already won. So I played it cool. I nodded at neighbors, kept mending fences, hauled hay, and pretended Karen's war didn't bother me. Outwardly, I was the same old Jack Carter, quiet, steady, unbothered. Inwardly, I was sharpening the axe. Funny thing is, Karen mistook my calm for weakness. She thought I was ignoring her because I was scared, or maybe because she'd already beaten me down. And in her arrogance, she pushed harder. That's the thing about people drunk on power, they can't stop drinking. One afternoon, I caught her at the property line again, snapping pictures of my gate with her phone. She didn't see me at first, and I stood there quietly, watching her angle the camera this way and that, like she was building a case file. Finally, I stepped out from behind the truck. Getting a good angle, I asked. She startled, nearly dropping the phone. Then she recovered, plastering that smug smile across her face. Just gathering evidence. You'll be hearing from us soon. I tipped my hat, grinning. Good. I've been gathering some of my own. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. It was there and gone in a second, but I caught it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. Driving back up to the house, I realized something important. Karen's weakness wasn't just legal or financial. It was her pride. She needed to win, needed to dominate, and that desperate need made her sloppy. She was bluffing fines she couldn't issue, making threats she couldn't back up, spending money she couldn't explain. Every move she made left a trail, and I was following it step by step. All I had to do was wait for her to make the one mistake she couldn't walk back. And knowing Karen, that mistake was coming sooner rather than later. I leaned back in my porch chair that evening, sipping bourbon as the sun sank low behind the cottonwoods. The bison moved slow and steady across the field, the sound of their hooves carrying in the quiet dusk, peaceful as ever. And all I could think was, Karen doesn't even know she's standing on the edge of a cliff. One more step, and gravity will take care of the rest. For all the scheming I'd uncovered, for all the records and gossip I'd stacked neatly in my file cabinet, none of it prepared me for the day Karen finally made her move. She'd hinted at further measures before, but even I didn't expect she'd be bold or foolish enough to cross the line the way she did. It was a Saturday morning. The kind of morning ranchers look forward to: cool air, dew on the grass, the smell of earth and hay mixing together in a way city folk will never understand. I had just finished feeding the herd when I noticed something odd down the drive. Dust rising, engines idling. A crew of men in reflective vests had parked a flatbed truck near my gate. At first, I thought maybe the county was working on the road, but then I saw her, Karen, standing there like a general directing her troops, clipboard in hand, sunglasses gleaming even though the sun hadn't cleared the trees yet. My stomach sank. I hurried down the drive, boots crunching against the gravel. "What in God's name are you doing?" I barked. Karen turned slowly, lips curling into that familiar smug smile. "Removing a non-compliant structure," she said, as if rehearsed. I glanced at the men. They looked uneasy, their hands resting nervously on the heavy machinery. "This is private property," I warned them. "You've got no right to touch that gate." One of the workers cleared his throat. "Ma'am said it was approved." Approved by who, I demanded. Her. "She doesn't own this land. I do." But Karen didn't flinch. "This eyesore has been an ongoing violation. Cedar Ridge voted unanimously to remove it. We're simply enforcing community standards." My jaw tightened. "Your community ends at that cottonwood line. You've got no jurisdiction here." She lifted her chin, smug as ever. "We'll see what the county says." And with that, she waved her hand. The men started their machines. I shouted, but the roar of engines drowned me out. In minutes, they were unbolting steel, cutting through posts, yanking my gate out of the earth like it was nothing more than a garden fence. I stood there, fists clenched, heart hammering, as the very line that separated my herd from her subdivision was loaded onto a truck bed. "Don't worry," Karen said sweetly. "We'll store it for you until you can replace it with something more tasteful." The gall of that woman. Neighbors had gathered by then, drawn by the noise. Some whispered nervously. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few clapped, egging her on. Karen basked in it, smiling like she'd just been crowned Queen of Cedar Ridge. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just stood there, silent, letting her mistake burn itself into memory. Because I knew what she didn't. That gate wasn't decoration. It was protection. Without it, there was nothing holding back 12 tons of bison. By the time the trucks pulled away, the herd had noticed the commotion. They'd gathered near the fence line, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed on the wide, open path where the gate once stood. Karen turned to me one last time. "Maybe next time you'll take our letter seriously." I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because right then, a low rumble rolled across the ground, the sound of hooves. The herd was on the move. Karen froze. For the first time since this whole feud began, her smug mask cracked. She looked from me to the open drive, to the bison advancing with the steady rhythm of thunder building on the horizon. "Jack," she whispered, her voice suddenly thin. "They wouldn't. They won't." I crossed my arms. "You just opened the door." And then it happened. The herd surged forward, muscles rippling beneath shaggy coats, horns catching the light as they broke into a run. The ground shook beneath the weight of them. Dust billowed up, and the sound was deafening, primal. Karen screamed. Neighbors scattered, tripping over themselves to get out of the way. Lawn ornaments toppled, fences splintered, gardens flattened beneath the charge. Patio furniture went flying. The herd stormed straight into Cedar Ridge like nature reclaiming the land, unstoppable and unyielding. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The sheriff's office would get calls, the county would get involved, and when the dust settled, everyone would know exactly who caused it. Karen had fired her shot, but all she'd done was shoot herself in the foot. As chaos unfolded, I walked back to the porch, calm as could be. Buck wagged his tail, watching the scene with canine amusement. I poured myself a bourbon a little early in the day for it. Sure, but the occasion called for it. From my porch, I watched Karen run up and down the street, shrieking orders no one obeyed. The herd trampled her pristine lawn, snapped her white picket fence like a toothpick, and left steaming reminders of their visit across her driveway. It was pandemonium, and it was all her doing. That evening, when the dust settled and the herd had wandered back toward the ranch, Karen came storming up my drive, hair disheveled, face red as a chili pepper. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You're responsible for the damage." I leaned back in my chair, calm as a stone. "Funny," I said, sipping my drink. "I had a gate to prevent this. You removed it." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had no words. For once, she was speechless. I knew then the tide had turned. When the herd finally wandered back behind the cottonwoods and settled into the pasture, you could have heard a pin drop in Cedar Ridge. What had once been a neighborhood of manicured lawns and tidy flower beds now looked like a tornado had danced through it. Lawns shredded, fences flattened, driveways covered in hoof prints, and Karen standing in the middle of it all, screeching at anyone who'd listen. But me, I didn't lift a finger to stop her yelling. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the best revenge isn't quick. It's patient, it's methodical, and it leaves no doubt about who was in the wrong. So that night, I opened my file drawer. Out came the stack of letters, the flyers, the zoning maps, and the county records. I spread them across my kitchen table, the lamplight catching on the ink. It looked less like ranch paperwork and more like a courtroom exhibit, and that's exactly what it was going to become. First thing the next morning, I called Sheriff Dugan, old friend of mine. We'd gone to high school together, and he knew my ranch better than anyone. "Doug," I said, "we've got ourselves a mess out here. I need you to come by and see something." He showed up an hour later, dust kicking up behind his cruiser as he pulled down my drive. When he stepped out, I handed him a folder thick with copies of everything Karen had thrown at me. He flipped through it, eyebrows rising higher with each page. "Jack," he muttered, "this woman's out of her mind. She's got no authority over your land. None. I know." I said, "Steady." But she went ahead and removed my gate anyway. Without it, the herd got loose. You saw the damage. He let out a low whistle. "Yeah, the county's already getting calls from half of Cedar Ridge. They're demanding something be done." "Well," I said, "now you know exactly who's to blame." Dugan nodded, snapping the folder shut. "Leave it with me. We'll file a report. You might want to get a lawyer too if she tries to pin this on you. You'll need more than common sense to defend yourself." I already had one in mind. Later that afternoon, I drove into town and sat down in the office of Claire Reynolds, a sharp attorney with a reputation for cutting HOA boards down to size. She listened carefully as I laid out the story, her eyes narrowing when I described Karen's crew tearing out my gate. "You have photos?" she asked. I slid a stack across the desk, pictures of the workers, the flatbed truck, and Karen herself standing smug as they hauled my gate away. She smiled, slow and deliberate. "Jack, this isn't just trespassing. This is destruction of private property. You've got damages, you've got witnesses, and you've got motive. If she tries to flip this on you, she'll hang herself in court." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. Over the next few days, I shored up my position. I replaced the gate bigger, stronger, reinforced steel set deeper in concrete, built to withstand anything short of a bulldozer. Every step of construction was photographed, every receipt filed. If Karen so much as sneezed in its direction, I'd have proof she was interfering again. Meanwhile, I made quiet calls to county officials. The zoning commissioner confirmed in writing, black ink, county letterhead, that my land was exempt from HOA authority. The Agricultural Bureau supplied documents affirming my right to raise bison on the property, citing livestock protection laws dating back decades. Every paper, every seal, went into the growing stack in my file cabinet. But I didn't just prepare legally, I prepared socially too. The Harrisons, that young couple who'd whispered their support at the diner, invited me over for coffee. "Jack," they said, "a lot of us don't agree with Karen. We like having your ranch here. It makes this place feel real, not just plastic houses in a row." Word spread quietly. A retired vet down the street stopped by to say he respected the herd. A mother told me her kids loved watching the bison from their backyard. Even some HOA members confided that they were sick of Karen's heavy hand. I didn't need an army. I just needed people willing to speak up when the time came. By the end of that week, I had everything lined up: the legal documents, the sheriff's report, the lawyer's backing, and a handful of neighbors who'd testify on my behalf. Meanwhile, Karen carried on like a queen, unbothered by rebellion. She strutted around Cedar Ridge, barking orders, assuring anyone who'd listen that she had everything under control. But her voice grew shriller, her gestures more frantic. I could see it in her eyes. She knew the tide was turning. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, she marched up my drive again, flanked by 2 board members. Her heels clicked against the gravel as she jabbed a finger at my new gate. "You think this intimidates me?" she snapped. "You can't just build whatever you want." I leaned against the post, arms crossed, steady as stone. "Karen, this gate isn't here to intimidate anyone. It's here to keep my herd safe from you as much as anyone." Her face flushed crimson. "Mark my words, Carter, this isn't over." I almost laughed, because I knew in truth it was nearly over. All I had to do was wait for the showdown. And when it came, I'd be ready to play my ace card. The showdown didn't come quietly. It arrived like a thunderstorm, rolling in with raised voices, flashing tempers, and the weight of truth ready to strike. It started when Cedar Ridge called an emergency HOA meeting. Word spread fast: mandatory attendance, urgent community business, liability concerns. It was obvious what they meant: me, my ranch, and my herd. Claire, my attorney, told me to show up. Let them talk. She said, "Then we'll end it." So I went. The meeting was held in their polished clubhouse, a place that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fake leather. The walls were lined with inspirational posters about community spirit and shared values. I stood in the back, hat in my hands, boots caked with honest dirt that looked out of place on their pristine carpet. Karen stood at the front, flanked by her loyal board members. She looked smug, like a queen about to deliver a decree. "Neighbors," she began, her voice smooth, "we have endured weeks of disruption, damage, and danger caused by one man's refusal to comply with our community standards." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. She gestured dramatically toward me. "Jack Carter's so-called ranch is a threat to our safety and our property values. His animals destroyed fences, lawns, and gardens. He has ignored countless warnings. Tonight, we must vote to pursue legal action and hold him accountable." Applause broke out from her die-hard supporters. Others shifted uneasily in their seats. A few glanced at me with sympathy, but fear kept their mouths shut. I let her have her moment. Let her build herself up. Then Claire stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the tile. She carried a thick binder under one arm. "Before anyone votes," Claire said, her voice calm but commanding, "you should know the facts. Not rumors, not accusations. Facts." Karen's smile faltered. Claire opened the binder and laid out documents on the front table for everyone to see. First, zoning records. Carter Ranch has been agricultural land since 1912. It is not, and has never been, part of Cedar Ridge. Your bylaws do not apply. Second, livestock permits. Mr. Carter is fully licensed to raise and maintain his bison herd. Third, photographic evidence. She flipped through glossy prints, Karen's crew tearing down my gate, loading it onto a flatbed, Karen herself directing them with a smug grin. The room went silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire continued, "the only reason the herd entered your neighborhood is because this woman," she pointed directly at Karen, "illegally ordered the removal of a lawful barrier. She trespassed, destroyed private property, and in doing so, endangered everyone here. If anyone is responsible for the damage, it is her." The silence broke like glass. Gasps, whispers, even a few shouts filled the room. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "That's a lie," she shrieked. "He staged those photos. Claire raised a hand, unbothered. "Sheriff Dugan's official report corroborates everything, and if you doubt it, ask yourselves, why is HOA money missing from your account's funds signed off by Karen Whitfield for community improvements? That never happened. You've been paying for her vendettas. That did it." The crowd erupted. People stood, pointing fingers, voices rising. "She used our money. I never approved that. Where did the funds go?" Karen stammered, her voice drowned by the wave of anger. The board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, sliding their chairs back as though they didn't want to be caught in the blast radius. I stayed quiet, leaning on the wall in the back. Sometimes you don't need to swing the hammer yourself, you just let gravity do the work. But fate has a way of driving the nail deeper. Just then, a commotion stirred outside. Through the wide clubhouse windows, I saw them, my herd, moving slow and steady along the fence line. Their massive silhouettes loomed against the setting sun, shaggy coats glowing in the fading light. The timing couldn't have been better. Every eye in that room turned toward the window, where a dozen bison stood like silent judges watching the scene unfold. I cleared my throat and finally spoke. "That's what this has been about from the start. Those animals out there, they're not a threat. They're not monsters. They're part of my life, part of this land. And they were never a problem until someone decided she wanted control where she had none." The room was hushed now, all eyes swinging back to Karen. She looked cornered, sweat beading along her hairline, her voice faltering as she tried to defend herself. I was protecting the community." "No," Claire cut in. "You were protecting your pride. And now everyone here is paying the price." The HOA meeting dissolved into chaos. Neighbors shouted, demanding her resignation. Others threatened lawsuits. A few stormed out, muttering curses under their breath. Karen tried to hold her ground, but it was like watching a sandcastle collapse under a rising tide. Her allies backed away, one by one, leaving her stranded at the front of the room, her voice hoarse and shaking. Finally, she snapped. "This isn't over," she screamed, slamming her clipboard onto the table before storming out of the clubhouse, her heels clattering against the tile, but everyone knew it was over. I left quietly, tipping my hat to Claire. The sheriff met me outside. shaking his head with a grin. "Well, Jack, you sure stirred up a hornet's nest." "Didn't have to stir much," I said. "She built it herself." Behind us, the bison turned and wandered back toward the ranch, calm as ever, as if to remind everyone that the land doesn't bow to clipboards and bylaws. And just like that, the storm had broken. Karen was finished. The week after that explosive HOA meeting, Cedar Ridge was never the same. Karen disappeared for a few days. Some said she holed up in her house, blinds drawn tight, phone calls unanswered. Others whispered she'd gone to stay with her sister 2 counties over, hoping to ride out the storm. Either way, she wasn't strutting down the sidewalks anymore, and the silence felt almost unnatural. But the silence didn't last. A formal letter arrived at my ranch, this time not stuffed into my mailbox by Karen's hand, but delivered officially by courier. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm representing Cedar Ridge residents. And it wasn't aimed at me. It was a class action notice against Karen Whitfield, accusing her of misuse of funds, abuse of power, and reckless endangerment of community safety. I read it twice, slow, letting every word sink in. The very people she had ruled with her clipboard and her smug smile were now turning on her with the same ferocity she had aimed at me. That afternoon, Sheriff Dugan stopped by the ranch. He leaned against his cruiser, sipping coffee from a thermos. "She's done. Jack," he said. "The county's pressing charges. Misappropriation of HOA funds, trespassing, property destruction. She's looking at fines. Maybe worse." I nodded, gazing out toward the herd. They grazed peacefully in the late light, tails swishing lazily. You'd never know they'd been at the center of a neighborhood war. "Funny thing," I said. "All this because she couldn't stand the sight of a gate." Dugan chuckled. "Some folks can't help themselves. Pride blinds them. They don't see the cliff until they're already falling." In the weeks that followed, Cedar Ridge scrambled to clean up the mess. New board members were elected, people who actually cared about their neighbors instead of power plays. The missing funds were traced, restitution demanded. And as for Karen, well, last I heard, she sold her house at a loss and moved out of the county altogether. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. Revenge isn't always about shouting your victory from the rooftops. Sometimes it's about sitting on your porch, sipping bourbon, and watching peace return to the land you love. And peace did return. I rebuilt my gate again, stronger than ever reinforced steel, concrete footings deep in the soil. Not just because I needed it for the herd, but because it stood as a symbol, a line, a reminder that boundaries matter. Neighbors started warming up again. The Harrisons brought over a pie one evening as thanks. The retired vet down the street stopped by to lend me a new tool for mending fence posts. Even kids would wander close, waving at the bison from a safe distance, their laughter carrying on the wind. Life had a rhythm again: sunrise chores, midday repairs, sunset peace. The kind of rhythm no HOA meeting could ever manufacture. Sometimes, when I sat on that porch in the evening, I thought about Karen, about how far she'd gone just to try to control something that was never hers, about how blind ambition can turn the simplest matters, a gate, a herd, a property line, into full-blown wars. But I also thought about resilience, about how, no matter how loud the noise gets, the land itself doesn't bend. The herd doesn't care about gossip or bylaws. The sky doesn't shift for clipboards and signatures. Out here, truth has a way of outlasting arrogance. And as the stars filled the Montana sky, I realized I hadn't just won against Karen. I'd preserved something far greater: the freedom to live by the rules of the land, not the whims of petty power. The war was over, and the ranch, like always, endured. If there's one lesson in all this, it's that boundaries matter, not just fences and gates, but the respect we owe each other as neighbors and as people. Pride can blind us, but humility keeps us grounded. Karen lost because she crossed a line she never had the right to cross. And in the end, her downfall was a reminder that arrogance never outlasts truth. So if you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA or faced a battle where common sense had to stand against stubborn pride, remember this story. The land doesn't lie, and neither do the consequences. Now I want to hear from you. Share your own HOA horror stories in the comments. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more.